Welcome to Katie's Storybook Adventures. I'm Miss Katie, and I'm so excited to go on today's reading adventure with you. On today's adventure, we'll be practicing our counting with Pete the cat. Can you help me count his groovy buttons? Pete the cat and his 4 groovy buttons, created by James Dean. Story by Eric Litwin. If you have a copy of this book at home, my little adventurers, I invite you to grab it and follow along. And don't forget, if you enjoyed today's adventure, please remember to thumbs up this video and subscribe to my channel for more reading adventures. Pete the cat put on his favorite shirt with 4 big, colorful, round, groovy buttons. He loves his buttons so much, he sang this song. My buttons, my 4 groovy buttons. My buttons, my 4 groovy buttons. Pop? Oh no! One of the buttons popped off and rolled away. How many buttons are left? 3! 4 minus 1 equals 3. Did Pete cry? Goodness, no. Buttons come and buttons go. He kept on singing his song. My buttons, my 3 groovy buttons. My buttons, my 3 groovy buttons. Pop? Oh no! Another button popped off and rolled away. How many buttons are left? 2! 3 minus 1 equals 2. Did Pete cry? Goodness, no. Buttons come and buttons go. He kept on singing his song. My buttons, my 2 groovy buttons. My buttons, my 2 groovy buttons. Pop! Oh no! Another button popped off and rolled away. How many buttons are left? 1! 2 minus 1 equals 1. Did Pete cry? Goodness, no. Buttons come and buttons go. He kept on singing his song. My button, my 1 groovy button. My button. Pop! Oh no! The last button popped off and rolled away. How many buttons are left? 0. 1 minus 1 equals 0. Did Pete cry? Goodness, no. Buttons come and buttons go. Pete looked down at his buttonless shirt, and what do you think he saw? His belly button! And he kept on singing his song. My button, still have my belly button. My button, still have my belly button. It's all good. I guess it simply goes to show that stuff will come and stuff will go. But do we cry? Goodness, no. We keep on singing. Buttons come and buttons go. Crayons Rock by Kimberly and James Dean. Pete loves his big box of groovy crayons. He loves to draw things like cars, trucks, flowers, and trees, and most of all, the big blue sea. From rockin' red to cool cat blue, with a box of crayons, there's nothing Pete can't do. One day, Pete decided to draw something new. His friends. Using lots of colors is so much fun. Pete wanted to use every one. He scribbled and drew a great big smile. His drawings were groovy and rockin' with style. Crayons rock. Pete was proud of the pictures he drew. He hoped his friends would dig them too. Pete showed Grumpy Toad first. Grumpy Toad said, "This doesn't look right. Those colors are way too bright." Pete thought, "Hey, no sweat. That's all right. The next one will be dynamite." Pete showed Gus his picture too. Gus asked, "Who is this supposed to be? It doesn't really look like me." Pete thought, "Hey, no sweat. That's all right. The next one will be just right." Pete finally showed Callie her picture. Callie said, "This one is fine, but it feels like something's missing from mine." Pete said, "What a mess! Bummer, I guess my drawings aren't the best." Pete started to frown. He put his crayons down. In art class, the teacher asked, "Pete, what are you going to make?" "I don't know. I'm afraid of making a mistake." Pete looked around. Gus drew the coolest superheroes. Callie's flowers were awesome out of sight.
Grumpy's motorcycle was just right. Pete's heart sank. His paper was blank. The gang looked at Pete and said, "No sweat, it's all right. It doesn't have to be just right. Your art is cool because it's you. Your art is so unique. Grab your groovy box of crayons. Show us your technique." The teacher agreed. Art should be fun. Art is for everyone. From rockin' red to cool cat blue, with a box of crayons, there's nothing you can't do. Pete smiled. There's no rules. It's no big deal. Art is about how it makes you feel. Pete loved his cool art. That's the one thing Pete knew. Suddenly, Pete knew exactly what to do. He tried again. Instead of drawing them one by one, Pete drew the whole gang, just having fun. Wow, way to go, Pete! That's a rockin' masterpiece! Grumpy Toad, Gus, and Callie agreed. Pete's picture was off the charts. See? That's what groovy thing about art. The best art comes from the heart. Crayons rock!
Pete the Cat, Super Pete by Kimberly and James Dean. Pete the cat is out for a walk. Pete listens to the owls. He listens to the frogs. Just then, Pete hears a beep. It is not coming from outside. It is coming from his watch. Pete races home. It is time for Pete the cat to become Super Pete. Pete presses a button in his room. The wall slides away. Pete sees a set of steps. Down, down, down he goes. Pete steps into his lair. It is full of groovy things to help him fight crime. Pete the cat puts on his awesome cat suit. He puts on his cape and his sneakers. Now Super Pete is ready to save the city. Pete sees a flashing light. There's a message on his computer. It is the mayor. Come quick, Super Pete, the mayor says. We need your help. There is trouble at the warehouse. Pete pulls a lever. Whoosh! Pete's nifty jet sinks into his lair. Pete hops into the jet. He zips into the air. Super Pete is on his way to save the day. Pete races through the sky. He hits a button. The jet shimmers. The jet disappears. Now the jet is invisible. No one will know. Super Pete is coming. Pete hovers over the warehouse. He straps on a parachute. He jumps. Pete lands on the roof. He goes inside the warehouse. It is dark. He cannot see. Pete puts on his night vision goggles. He sees two bad guys. They are carrying a box. Pete picks up a rock. He puts it in a slingshot. The rock hits the box. The bad guy drops the box. They climb out a window. Pete races to the window. The bad guys have a boat. They're getting away! Pete pushes a button on his catsuit. His sneakers turn into flippers. A mask closes over his face. Pete jumps into the water. He swims after the bad guys. Pete takes a rope from his pocket. He twirls it over his head. Pete aims. He throws. The rope catches the boat. Pete pulls himself along the rope. Pete climbs into the bad guy's boat. He ties up the bad guys. Pete pushes a button on his watch. His jet appears above him. Pete pulls the bad guys into his jet. Pete brings the bad guys to the mayor. Super Pete, save the day!
Pete the Cat, Firefighter Pete by James Dean. We're going on a class trip today, says Principal Nancy. She leads the class to a bright yellow bus. Everyone climbs on board. I wonder where we're going, says Pete. They are going to visit the firehouse today. The bus parks next to the bright red firehouse. Pete and his classmates are excited. The firehouse is huge. It's so big it can hold 2 long red fire trucks and all of the firefighters' equipment. The firefighters show the kids around. They give everyone a turn to ring the old brass fire bell outside the firehouse. Then all the kids take turns sliding down the firefighter's pole. Whee! Callie yells as she glides down. Firefighters allow the kids to try on their gear. Firefighters wear a lot of equipment. First, Pete puts on the heavy black overalls. Then he steps into the tall black boots. A firefighter helps Pete put on the heavy yellow jacket. Finally, they place a hard black helmet on Pete's head. All this gear is very heavy. Pete can barely move. Firefighters allow the kids to explore one of the fire trucks. Callie sits in the driver's seat. She presses the horn. Brrr! It's so loud that all the kids cover their ears. Then Pete turns on the sirens and lights. The sirens blare. Woo-wee, woo-wee! The lights flash red and yellow. Suddenly, a loud bell rings in the firehouse. Uh-oh, it's the fire alarm. There's a fire in town. Gear up, Pete! The firefighters scramble into their gear very quickly. Pete puts on his gear too. They all climb aboard the fire truck and turn on the siren and lights. Firefighter Pete and the 2 firefighters are on their way. Woo-wee, woo-wee! The fire engine races through town and the lights flash round and round. A firefighter presses the horn. Burr! All the other cars move out of the way. There's the fire. It's hot and loud, but the firefighters know exactly what to do. They work together as a team to connect the fire truck to the fire hydrant. Then the firefighters also attach a long, heavy hose to the truck. Firefighter Pete gives a signal, and the firefighters turn on the water. Whoosh! The water gushes out very fast. Several firefighters must hold the hose to control it. Pete helps direct the hose as they spray the fire with water. The fire is starting to go out. There is smoke everywhere. Suddenly, Pete hears yelling from the roof. No, it's Grumpy Toad. He needs to be rescued. The firefighters raise a long ladder from the truck. Crink, crink, crink. The ladder goes up and up and up. Firefighter Pete and another firefighter help Grumpy Toad climb down the ladder carefully. Yay! The fire is out and everyone is safe. The firefighters drive back to the firehouse. They take off all their gear. They pat Pete on the back and say, "Good job, Pete." Firefighter Pete helped save the day.
Pete the Cat and the Lost Tooth by James Dean. Pete lost a tooth. Put it under your pillow, his mom says. The tooth fairy will come. Pete puts the tooth under his pillow. He closes his eyes. He hears a jingle. It is the tooth fairy. I am very busy tonight, she says. I can help, says Pete. Great! She gives Pete magic wings. He can fly. Visit these cool kids, says the tooth fairy. Just take the tooth and leave a coin, she says. Pete is ready to go. Callie is the first on the list. There is Callie's lost tooth. Pete takes the tooth. He leaves a coin for Callie. Alligator is next on the list. Look, Alligator's lost tooth. Careful, it is very sharp. Pete takes the tooth. He leaves a coin for Alligator. Gus the platypus is next on the list. Uh-oh. Where is the tooth? The tooth is not here. The tooth is not there. The tooth is not anywhere. Where is Gus's lost tooth? The lost tooth is lost. Does Pete panic? Nope. He knows what to do. Look, Gus is awake. Where is your tooth, Gus? Pete asks. Platypuses don't have teeth, says Gus. But I still want to be a part of the tooth fairy fun. No worries, says Pete. Pete puts a coin under Gus's pillow. Thank you, Gus says. You're welcome, says Pete. Good night, Gus. Great work, Pete, says the tooth fairy. No problem, says Pete. Not everyone is the same, but being kind is always cool. Pete the Cat, Not So Groovy Day by Kimberly and James Dean. If you have a copy of this book at home, my little adventurers, I invite you to grab it and follow along. And don't forget, if you enjoyed today's adventure, please remember to thumbs up this video and subscribe to my channel for more reading adventures. Pete wakes up. He swings his legs over the bed. Brrr, the floor is cold. Pete looks down. Oh no! One of his slippers is missing. That is not groovy, Pete says. Pete is ready to get dressed. He puts on his pants. He puts on his socks. He looks for his coolest shirt. Oh no! His best shirt is dirty! Pete puts on his second best shirt. This shirt is cool too, he says. Pete's tummy rumbles. He is hungry. He hopes Mom made fish. Mom gives Pete a plate. It is eggs! Eggs are not groovy, Pete says. Pete's eggs are good, but they are not what he wanted. His morning is not off to a good start. Time for school, Mom says. Get your bag, Pete. You do not want to be late. Pete picks up his bag. Oh no, all his books fall out. Pete looks at the floor. It is a mess. Pete has a lot of books. Hurry up, Pete, Mom says. The bus is here. Pete picks up his books. He runs outside. But Pete is too late. The bus is gone. It left without him. Pete starts to walk. Walking is not cool, he says. Then Pete sees a bird. But that bird is cool. Pete gets to school. He sits down. Pete, you are late, his teacher says. It is time to draw. Now Pete is happy. He loves to draw. He loves to use lots of colors. Pete opens his bag. Oh no, his crayons are not there. They must be at home. Pete draws with a pen. He does not like his art. It has only one color. This art is not groovy, he says. In music class, Pete plays his guitar. His song is groovy. Pete starts to feel better. Oh no, Pete's pick breaks. He cannot play anymore. I do not feel cool, Pete says. At recess, Pete sits under a tree. He wants to go home. Pete does not like this day. Callie sees Pete. She sits next to him. You look sad, Callie says. What is wrong? Pete tells Callie about his day. Nothing has gone my way. Today is not groovy, Pete says. Not groovy at all. Callie smiles. Some days are groovy, some are not. You will be okay, Pete. You are the coolest cat I know. Pete looks up. He smiles. You're right, Callie. Today is not groovy, but I am groovy. I am cooler than any bad day. Way to go, Pete, Callie says. Now let's go play. Pete and Callie swing on the swings. They slide down the slide. They kick a ball back and forth. Pete smiles. He is happy. Today is groovy after all.
The Cat, Pete's Big Lunch, created by James Dean. Here comes Pete. It's lunchtime. Pete is ready to eat. What should Pete eat? A sandwich would be nice. Yes, Pete wants a sandwich. Pete opens the fridge. He takes out a loaf of bread. He finds a yummy fish. He adds tomato and mayo. Pete looks at his sandwich. It is too small. Something is missing. Pete knows what it needs. His sandwich needs an apple. Pete loves apples. His sandwich needs crackers. Crackers are crunchy. Pete loves crunchy crackers. Pete looks at his sandwich again. It is still too small. Pete is very hungry. Pete adds a pickle. Pete adds cheese. Pete adds an egg, 2 hot dogs, a banana, and a can of beans. Something is missing. Pete adds ice cream. He takes 3 huge scoops. Pete's sandwich is too big for Pete to eat. Pete wonders what to do. Pete thinks and thinks. I've got it, Pete says. Pete calls all of his friends. He asks them to come over. Everyone goes to Pete's house. They are all very hungry. Pete shows them his big lunch. Are you hungry? Asks Pete. Pete's sandwich is big enough for everyone. Dig in, says Pete. Pete's sandwich is good. Pete's sandwich is very good. Pete's sandwich is all gone. Pete's friends are full. They like Pete's big lunch. Thanks for lunch, Pete's friends say. Thanks for sharing. You're welcome, Pete says. Sharing is cool.
Pete the Kitty's First Day of Preschool by Kimberly and James Dean. Today is a big day for Pete the Kitty. It's going to be so cool. It's his first day of preschool. What should Pete bring to school today? He takes pencils, glue sticks, a paintbrush, and crayons too. Of course, Pete's favorite color is blue. He runs to put everything in his new backpack. Pete's backpack is really groovy. He picked it out himself at the store. Now it is time to head out the door. Don't forget your snack, Pete, says Mom. Pete thinks a banana will be an awesome snack. The school bus stops in front of Pete's house. Pete gets on the bus for the first time. He knows just what to do. His big brother Bob rides the bus too. Bob walks Pete to his classroom. Are you nervous? Bob asks. No, says Pete. I'm cool. See you after school. Pete meets his teacher. She wears glasses and has lots of style. Welcome to preschool, she says with a big smile. At story time, Pete's teacher reads a book about a mouse who loves cookies and a cat who loves his shoes. Pete loves cookies and his shoes too. Next, it is time to paint. Pete paints a blue kitty as happy as could be. Look, it's me! It's almost snack time. Let's wash our paws. Pete eats his banana. He eats every bite. Yum! That was just right. Now it's time to sing. Everyone gathers around to sing their favorite songs. Pete loves singing along. Soon it is time to go home, but Pete isn't ready to leave. He loves reading, painting, snacking, and getting to sing. Preschool is awesome. Pete loves everything.
Pete the Cat's Groovy Imagination by Kimberly and James Dean. Pete the Cat was happy. Today would be so much fun. Chilling out, catching vibes, sand, surfing, and lots of fun. But when Pete looked outside, he got down in the dumps sad. Dark clouds and pouring rain could make this good day turn bad. Pete didn't complain. He did not feel blue. Pete knew he could find something fun to do. Pete drew a cool picture. Pete strummed a little tune until he saw something too good to be true. Pete found a big box. He looked it up and down. He turned it side to side, and he spun it all around. The box was round and it was strong. The box was wide and tall. Maybe this wasn't just any box after all. This box rocks! The box was big and it was groovy. The box could be something new. Suddenly, Pete's imagination grew and grew and grew. Maybe it was more than a box. Maybe it was more than it seemed. Pete closed his eyes and had an out-of-this-world dream. It was more than a box. It was a groovy rocket ship. Pete saw the moon on his outer space trip. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, blast off! Pete was heading home. He landed splash in the sea. Pete had to think fast. Now what could this box be? The box was big and it was groovy. The box could be something new. Suddenly, Pete's imagination grew and grew and grew. The box was now a yellow submarine. Pete dived way down into the sea. Pete wore his goggles to see the underwater scene. The submarine crashed when it reached land. Now the box was lying sideways in the sand. But what's a cat to do with a box that couldn't stand? The box was big and it was groovy. The box could be something new. Suddenly, Pete's imagination grew and grew and grew. And pretty soon, the box was not just a box lying on its side. It was a cool cat race car, revving for the fast, fast ride. Zoom, zoom, zoom. Pete won the race just like that. Then splat! The race car went flat. Now what good is a box that looks like a mat? The box was big and it was groovy. The box could be something new. Suddenly, Pete's imagination grew and grew and grew. Even though a flat box was not in the plan, Pete's imagined it was a stage for his jammin' rock band. Sometimes our plans just don't go right, but it doesn't mean the day can't be out of sight. If you use your imagination, you will see just how groovy your day can be. When you want to dream of something new, thinking outside the box is the grooviest thing to do.
The Cat Goes Camping by James Dean. Pete is excited to go camping. This is his first time. Don't forget your sleeping bag, says Dad, or your hiking boots, Mom says. The campsite is deep in the woods. Mom and Dad set up the tent. Pete and Bob help collect sticks so they can make a fire later. Pete and Bob go for a hike. Bob shows Pete the footprints of different animals. Do you think we will see anything cool? Asks Pete. Maybe, says Bob. Pete and his dad go fishing. They must be very quiet and very still to catch a fish. Fishing takes a long time. They finally catch some fish. Mom builds a fire. She cooks the fish for dinner. It tastes yummy. Next, Pete toasts marshmallows. Pete makes s'mores with chocolate and graham crackers. It starts to get dark out. Bob tells Pete a story about a scary, hairy giant. The giant lives in the woods. His name is Bigfoot. Do you think Bigfoot lives here? Asked Pete. No one has ever seen Bigfoot, says Bob. But don't let Bob scare you, says Dad. Bigfoot is not real, Mom says. Pete sighs with relief. But if he is real, I bet he's friendly, says Dad, and likes s'mores too. That's not scary, thinks Pete. Maybe he wants a s'more. Pete leaves one for his hairy friend. Soon it's time for bed. Lights out, boys, Dad says. Bob and Pete share a tent. Pete gets into his sleeping bag. It is cozy, but he cannot sleep. The woods seem extra dark, and all the sounds seem extra loud at night. Pete hears a weird swishing sound. What is that? He asks Bob. That's just the wind, says Bob. Pete hears an odd chirping noise. What is that? He asks aloud. Those are just the crickets. Pete hears a strange hooting sound. What is that? He wonders. That's just an owl. Pete thinks of his friend Owl. Pete hears a loud snapping sound. Crack! What is that? He wonders. But Bob is already fast asleep. Pete listens carefully. Crack! Is it Bigfoot? Pete peeks outside. It is too dark to see anything. When Pete wakes up, he checks the spot where he left the s'mores for Bigfoot. The s'more is gone! There is a note. It says, "Thanks for the treat. XOXO." Pete shows his family. Wow, I knew Bigfoot was real, says Bob. Pete knows Bigfoot is not scary. Just because he looks different does not mean he is scary. He even likes s'mores too.